Wayne, this is a summit with the theme being trust. So I'm going to hit you with the hardest question first.
Please.
The micromobility industry has been under fire for a few years now, in part because of some unfortunate accidents and concerns over safety, and in part because some people just don't like seeing the scooters and the bikes in public areas. So what are you doing to instill more trust and confidence in governments where you're operating and in the greater public?
Yeah, first, Lynn, thank you for having me. And it's an absolutely fair question. And the thing I'll start by saying is that we're actually much more safe than perhaps you perceive. We've done over 700 million trips in the history of Lime. In that time, 99.99% of the trips were incident-free. And we track safety incident every month. I go to a safety briefing. We look at ways to improve safety. So in 2023, our safety incident rate declined by 42% on an absolute basis, even though our trips grew by 37 million trips. And we work on things like hardware, rider safety education, in-app, and in person, as well as things like sobriety tests to continuously improve the safety of our hardware and our network.
Sorry, tell me more about these sobriety tests. We had discussed this before, but I'm interested. What does that mean? And what are some of the actual concrete examples in which you've addressed safety concerns that we can really latch onto?
Yeah, so for example, we work with cities to create slowdown zones. So there may be some areas where there's a lot of pedestrian walking, and we would slow down the bike or slow down the scooters so that to reduce the chance that there'll be a kind of an accident. Or we would do things like sobriety tests is if we're around, let's say, at night or in areas where we think there's a high rate of potential alcohol use, we ask you to take a simple test. It's not perfect, but it creates a barrier for you to take a trip. And we remind you, if you've had a drink, make sure you don't take a bike for this trip as a way to reduce the amount of people who may drink and ride, which is something we don't want to see ever. And we also invest in hardware to improve safety. So for example, Lime is the only operator in micromobility that develops, engineers our own scooters and bikes. So we can do it around rider safety. So we just launched a new Lime bike, and it's a lower center of gravity, so it's easier to step on, step off. It's lighter. So sometimes we get the feedback that our Lime bikes are too heavy. And when it's lower center of gravity, it's also easier to put your foot down if you're trying to stop the bike. And we design it to ensure that we can improve both access for riders of all backgrounds, all gender, all age groups, and we do it to improve the safety of our hardware.
It's funny that you should mention the heaviness. I can relate. I am also very short, and so I like being close to the ground and staying close to the ground. I don't trust myself on a bike, much less an electric bike or a scooter. And I wondered, can you elaborate on the efforts that you are taking to reduce the barrier to entry for people like me who are just naturally nervous about using your service?
Yeah, part of it is also teaching people how easy it is to use a Lime scooter or bike. So we do things like First Ride Academy in city. These are in-person events where we go to neighborhoods where people may not have access to e-bikes or e-scooters, and we let them ride for free to experience an e-bike. And then I think once you try it, you realize it's far safer and easier to use than perhaps you imagined. We also do things like we work with local advocacy groups like the London Cycling Campaign, LCC, to do cycling education, work with boroughs to make sure that there's good cycling paths. Over the last 5 years, I think London 4x the amount of bike lanes in London, which dramatically improves safety. The last thing I'll say about safety is that it is also, I think a big part of it is also about slowing down cars and preventing cars from going into areas where there's a lot of bike traffic and pedestrian traffic. And so we work with cities to create better regulations and better rules of the road to ensure that our riders are safe.
We've given the audience enough time to answer a very simple yes or no question, and I'd love to bring the poll results up if they aren't already. Just to have a question for you and follow up. The question was, do you use an electric scooter or an electric bike? And I'm seeing 61% of our audience today is saying that they don't use either. London is one of your largest markets. It's one of the biggest for Lime. What does that 61% tell you about the progress that is yet to be?
It says we still have more work to do. And the reason why I think we are so passionate about the push to build a future transportation that is shared, affordable, and most importantly, carbon-free is because transportation is the #1 source of carbon pollution in the UK. It's the #1 source of carbon pollution in Europe and the United States. And the vast majority of that is coming from cars and trucks. And if we're going to be serious about meeting the challenge of climate change, then we have to reduce our reliance on cars and improve our adoption of bikes and scooters as a preferred mode of transportation. And I also think maybe this is a reflection of this age group here, because when we look at Londoners, if you do a poll of Londoners between 18 and 39, 50% of London residents between 18 and 39 say they use an electric bike every single week. And so, but even 39% using electric bike is really encouraging as cities make that transition into a more green and sustainable future. But we're not fully there yet.
The audience is going to try not to take offense to the demographic observation that you've made. Some might say that we've moved past the early stages of the micromobility industry. The ones that have failed. The ones that have survived have survived. Lime has emerged as the largest micromobility company in the world. And I just wonder, now that you're all grown up, what's next for you?
Yep. We actually think so I think a lot of the funding markets are finally moving on to other things. And I think that's a good thing. When there's too much capital, it encourages bad behavior. It encourages companies to lose a lot of money because they can always raise more in the future. And I think it hurts all the other competitors. And while I think other competitors did not invest in the things they need to get to a sustainable business, Lime did. We invest in our own hardware, tech-enabled operations, and building strong relationships with cities, which is why Lime is the only profitable operator in the industry. And now we have a chance to continue to expand on that. I think the biggest opportunity is to deepen in the markets we're in. So in London, for example, we really want to become part of the transportation ecosystem to help more people and more cities transition out of cars. And for us to do that, we got to convince more people, like the 61% in this audience who are not riding bikes, to start using green transportation. But that's the biggest opportunity, deepening in the markets we're in, getting more people out of cars and into bikes and scooters. I think the second opportunity is expanding into new markets. So this year alone, we launched in Japan, in Greece, and we're going to soon launch in Mexico. And I think there's also opportunities around new modes of transportation, new hardware. Because Lime develops our own hardware in-house, we have the opportunity to develop new hardware that I would say appeal to different types of riders. So we're testing a new Lime glider in Zurich right now, which is a throttle bike, so you can put a throttle down. It looks like a lightweight moped, which allows people to go longer distances. And if you are wary of pedaling, or you don't want to pedal because it's hot outside, it allows you to leverage micromobility, maybe without the feeling of work.
Interesting. I'd be interested if I weren't so scared to try that moped. Financing-wise, sounds to me, just based on what you're saying, that you're not out there looking for funding. You don't need it. But I would be interested in what Lime's exit strategy is at the moment. Like, where do you see the company's path going?
Yeah, I think maybe this may be surprising to the audience, because I feel like if you only read the headlines, I think the perception is a lot of companies in our industry is struggling. And that is true, but I think Lime has been the exception. So 2023, we did over $600 million in gross bookings, growing at 32% a year. In fact, our 4-year top-line CAGR is 30%. And last year, we did over $90 million of company-wide adjusted EBITDA. Our first year of unlevered free cash flow positive, which means that we generate enough profits to fund all of our capital expenditure and growth. So we are not in need of incremental funding, which is very, very helpful given today's funding environment. But I do think if I look longer term, I think the right answer for Lime is to think about going public at some point. I think a lot of that will depend on the macro environment. And I think the IPO market is still quite choppy. So we're waiting for I think Lime is ready as a company. If you look at our growth rate and our margin profile, we are a greater than Rule of 40 company, which I think is a fantastic place to be as we're looking towards potentially going public. But we're looking for a better, I would say, macro environment, and some of that is outside of our control.
You and everyone else.
Yes.
Where would you list?
We haven't really thought about it, but probably in the United States, where our company is based.
All right. the UK audience here will be saying, yet another one. I wanted to talk a little bit about your competitors because, we talk about how you're grown up, the industry is more grown up, but you still have some formidable rivals. Tell me a little bit about what you see as your biggest competition and how you're going to continue to work to stand out.
Absolutely. Our biggest competition is the car. 60% of car trips in the UK are less than 5 miles. The most common number of passenger in a car is 1. Those people should not be driving a car. They should be riding a bike. They should be using micromobility. They should be on public transit. How do we get people out of cars into micromobility? That's our biggest competitor. From people in our industry, I do feel like Lime has separated ourselves from the rest of the pack because we've pursued a strategy of proprietary hardware. Everybody else in our industry buys from the same 2 Chinese manufacturers for their scooters and bikes. And you may walk around and say they all use the same e-bike. And the reason they all look the same is because they're exactly the same e-bike. And the problem, though, with that is that there's a conflict. Because if my business is to sell you, Lynn, more bikes and more parts and more scooters, then I don't have a lot of incentive to make them last longer, make them more sustainable. And as a result, I think that's why a lot of our competitors struggle to get to sustainability and profitability. When we own our own engineering and design, we constantly track every single spare parts. When does it break? Why does it break? And then we see if there's ways to improve the next batch in manufacturing. So we're constantly iterating. It's a constant feedback loop, which allows us to, over time, extend the life of our hardware and improve it around rideability and safety. And that's a big difference between Lime and our competitors. The second is tech-enabled operations. Lime is the global leader, which means we have more data than anybody else, which allows us to do things like demand forecasting better as well. Every city we're in, we project the probability of somebody wanting a bike trip or a scooter trip block by block in 15-minute increments. So we have a view of where we think demand is going to come from, and then we move our scooters and bikes to meet that demand. You can't build an accurate demand forecasting tool if you don't have the data. And Lime invests, as far as we can tell, 10x more into software, hardware technology than our nearest competitor. And as a result, we've really separated the pack from both operational tech and hardware tech. And I think the third piece that separates us is that we strive to be the best partners to cities. Lime wins 90+% of the competitive RFPs that come up, and we renew them at 95% rate. This is why Lime today is in almost 300 cities around the world in 30 countries, by far bigger than any of our nearest competitors.
How do you do that? How do you win those RFPs over all the others with the cities? Lots of whining and dining, or what do you?
No, I think cities want to see operational experience. And so I think the advantage of scale is that the more cities we win, the more other cities see Lime as a safe and reliable choice. There's this saying that nobody's been fired for buying IBM. Lime is the IBM of this industry. And people say, let's Lime to dinner, let's Lime here. We are the verb for biking in London. And you do that by doing the right thing again and again and again. And I do think cities also care about hardware. Every city wants to tell their citizens, we have the latest, the best hardware. And we go to these meetings and everybody else has cheap, poorly made Chinese bikes. And we have something that is unique, that we designed in-house for safety, for things like sustainability. And those are the reasons why I think we win 90+% of the RFPs.